Hello again. I'm Carol Ostro, president of the Actors Temple, and I'm very happy that you're joining us again for Chapter 2 of the PastisPrologue Stories of the Actors Temple by Ira Helf. Chapter 2. This is a story about Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, she wasn't Jewish, we know that. However, she did help the Jews at one critical point in our history. It's about 1939 when our story takes place, when movies such as Casablanca came to our theaters and was beginning to make us aware of the horrors that were going on in Europe and what was being done to assuage all of the horrors. And Eleanor and her husband did very little at that time until our story begins. Thank you so much for joining us. Chapter 2, and this particular chapter is going to be read by our very own Karen Hofstein-Heyman, who is on our board. I think you're going to enjoy the connection that Eleanor had with our wonderful Rabbi Burston. Thank you again for joining us. Please remember that we need your donations. Send whatever you can, and all of that information will be at the end of the story. So let's get started. Chapter 2, The PastisPrologue, Stories of the Actors Temple by Ira Helf. Enjoy. Bye now.
Hello, my name is Karen Hofstein-Heyman, and I'm going to read today from Eleanor Roosevelt, a friend of the Actors Temple, from the PastisPrologue Stories of the Actors Temple. On October 10, 1947, Eleanor Roosevelt sent a letter to Rabbi Bernard Burston, the chief rabbi of the Actors Temple. The letter was written on her personal stationery, with her New York apartment address at the top. This was an indication of the personal friendship that she had with Rabbi Burston. The letter reads, "I'm glad to have this opportunity again to send my good wishes to the Actors Temple. I know that the theatrical world, which makes up this congregation, gives generously to all the many causes that come up in the world today, and I hope that the gratitude which must come from their generosity is some small compensation. Very sincerely yours, Eleanor Roosevelt." Mrs. Roosevelt had written to Rabbi Burston before, as she states in the letter. There was a connection between these two people. There was also a connection between Eleanor Roosevelt and the Jewish community. Yet some people in our community feel that both Eleanor Roosevelt and her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, did not do as much as they could have to help the European Jewish community during World War II. To this day, the issue provokes heated debate. In these debates, people often cite the unfortunate fate of the SS St. Louis. The SS St. Louis sailed from Hamburg in May 1939 with 937 Jewish passengers who were looking to escape Nazism. The destination was Havana, Cuba. When they arrived, Cuba allowed only 28 passengers to disembark. More than 900 passengers remained on board. Upon leaving Havana, the ship attempted to approach Florida in an effort to bring its passengers to the United States. It was turned away due to U.S. immigration restrictions. The 900 passengers were returned to Europe, and upwards of 30% were murdered by the Nazis. Could Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt have done more to help the passengers of the St. Louis? Perhaps. Yet few people know that President and Mrs. Roosevelt also felt they could have done more. So much so that Eleanor Roosevelt personally vowed it would never happen again. She had the opportunity to live up to that promise 1 year later. In 1940, a group of Jewish refugees chartered a Portuguese cargo ship named the SS Kwanzaa. The ship left Lisbon in August 1940, bound for Veracruz, Mexico, with a first stop in New York. There were 317 Jewish refugees on board. 231 of the passengers were allowed to disembark in New York or in Veracruz. The 86 passengers who were not allowed to disembark in either port faced repatriation to Nazi-controlled Europe and deportation to concentration camps. The ship began its return to Europe, but first stopped in Norfolk, Virginia, to restock its coal supply. It was then that a clever Virginia maritime attorney named Jacob Marwitz, who also happened to be Jewish and had heard about the predicament of the SS Kwanzaa passengers, filed a lawsuit against the shipping community, saying that they failed to deliver on their contractual agreement to bring these passengers safely to New York or Mexico. Because of this lawsuit, the ship was detained in port in Virginia, giving them a little more time. Eleanor Roosevelt learned about the situation facing these 86 passengers. Remembering what had happened with the SS St. Louis, she knew she had to act fast. She pressured FDR, as only she could, to do something to help the SS Kwanzaa. FDR did take action and spent a few intense days in discussions with the State Department. Then, on September 11, 1940, President Roosevelt issued an executive order which allowed the 86 refugees to enter the United States as immigrants. Thank you, Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt's involvement with the Jewish community continued to expand in the years after World War II. She made her first trip to Israel in 1952 and made several other visits there in the following years. In the U.S., she received visits from Israeli diplomats, including David Ben-Gurion. She also had many Jewish friends in her network. Among her very close personal friends was Edna and David Gorowitz, with whom she shared an Upper East Side Manhattan townhouse until 1959, until her death in 1962. She was also dear friends with Joseph Lash, whom she met in 1939. Mr. Lash was a former United States correspondent for the New York Post. He later became a famous biographer of Eleanor Roosevelt, and of course she was friends with Rabbi Bernard Bernstein, rabbi of the Actors Temple in New York. Eleanor Roosevelt's connection to the Actors Temple and to the Jewish community is one of the many stories in the PastisPrologue Stories from the Actors Temple. I'm Karen Hofstein-Heyman, member of the board of the Actors Temple. Thank you.